Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Kevin is with the New Warehouse Podcast. He's the founder and host of the New Warehouse Podcast, but you do other stuff too.
I do other things, yeah.
Yeah, like boating,
No
lacrosse.
boating. No.
None of that?
I don't do any of
Okay.
those
Well, what do
things,
you do professionally?
Sure. So I work as a distribution manager, actually, focused on inventory control. And that's kind of how the podcast actually came about. I started working in distribution logistics about 8 years ago, mostly focused in inventory control, some quality control. But I got involved a lot with distribution center startups. So starting like from not from the ground up, but from basically four walls, going in and setting up all the infrastructure and kind of training out the whole staff and getting things ramped up and focusing on a lot of them were actually closing down older facilities and then going to newer, bigger, more centralized locations. So focusing on transferring all that inventory as well in the process. So from that is kind of where the podcast kind of grew, because I started to experience different things with different companies, and I was looking for something to learn more about the industry, I guess, and I was looking for a podcast, and I didn't find anything. So someone said I should start a podcast, and I guess I listened to them, and so I did that. So yeah, now actually the podcast is about a year old. Actually, it was a year old on Wednesday. Was the first anniversary.
Happy birthday, podcast.
Yes. Thank you.
Did you have a party?
No, we didn't have a party. We were at Modex, actually. Just got in here last night. So I guess that maybe is
That's a party.
little party. Yeah,
that's an appropriate place for a...
Yeah, I mean, when you're involved in warehousing, I guess that's a party for warehousing, right?
That is the party for warehousing. So if you guys don't know, Modex is a mega huge conference that they host every other year.
Right.
They rotate it with ProMat, and this year it was in Atlanta, and that just ended yesterday.
Right.
So Kevin drove from New Jersey.
Right, so I'm based in New Jersey, so I drove from New Jersey to Atlanta, and then I flew from Atlanta last night to here, and then I'll fly back to Atlanta tonight from here, and then drive back to New Jersey from Atlanta.
Which I think for probably a lot of us in the room sounds like a really not fun time, but Kevin really enjoys that. He likes driving.
Yeah, I like it. It's a chance.
Do you listen to podcasts while you drive?
I do. I actually listen to a lot of podcasts.
Do you listen to industry podcasts, or do you have like your own separate hobby podcast?
Yeah, I listen to some other ones in the industry as well. There's one, Warehouse and Operations as a Career, which is pretty good. It's by a guy, I think his name is Marty. That's pretty interesting. It's actually really focused on actually working like within the warehouse and working with forklifts and those types of things. Sometimes I listen to the Supply Chain Radio Now guys, which are also at Modex as well. But I listen to some outside of industry podcasts as well.
All right. I won't make you divulge what those outside are unless you want to have a drink about it later. There's a lot of true crime fans in this room, so if it's true crime, we could go
No,
with that
it's
too.
not true crime.
Not true crime.
It's all still business related. But not supply chain related.
Kevin, branch out. It's time for true crime, right? So I had actually found Kevin through Instagram.
Right.
We have a Go HLSP, which is our Hendricks Logistics Sector Partnership Instagram page. And so I was perusing through when we first loaded that to try and find some good people to follow and get connected with. And Kevin's Instagram page popped up and we connected. And I asked him if this would be something that, he'd be interested in having a conversation about. At that time, I think we were really mostly talking about the Hendricks Logistics Sector Partnership and what we were doing in Hendricks. And then we talked a little bit about the C conference and things kind of grew from there. So Kevin and I have had several phone converstions. We did do a podcast. Laura Hayes with MavPack, who's in our audience, also did a podcast recently with him. So I really we're flipping the script a smidge. I know you've got some questions, but I do have one burning question. Well, two.
Sure.
I came up with the second one while you were talking.
Oh, okay.
So you've been in this industry doing inventory control, things like that, which I have to assume has become one of the first things that people are automating pretty early on, because quality control and knowing those types of things obviously leads to other issues. So in your 8 years, have you seen technology in that specific part of the industry really change and grow and innovate a lot?
So from an inventory control perspective, I would say not quite yet. Definitely in the last year, yes. And at Modex this week, yes, seeing it. So basically focused on kind of automating that through the use of drone technology. So I actually did an episode interview with someone named Ian Smith from Ware Automation, and they have a autonomous drone system that the drone flies on its own. No one has to pilot it or anything of that nature. It navigates through your warehousing space based on just some location tags that you put up on your racking. It utilizes machine learning to find its way around and navigate throughout the warehouse, and then it uses that machine learning and captures whatever data is on the boxes in location, and it'll grab barcodes. It could actually, as it learns your product, it could actually read the writing and descriptions on the box itself to tell you what's there, and then it'll capture that image. So you can essentially have these drones fly in your downtime. So if you are closed for a certain period of time at night, or whenever your slowest time is, you can set these drones to go out into your warehouse and capture all this data. And they're essentially taking you from, maybe counting every location, depending on what your cycle count program is like, counting every location like every quarter, to now counting every location within like 1 week or 2 weeks. So it's really, the speed of which you're checking your inventory and just verifying what's there is increased dramatically. And obviously, it takes away that labor needed for cycle counting, so putting people out there in cycle counting. So you're in a sense kind of playing to the philosophy that introducing automation and robotics is actually going to elevate some roles in warehousing. So it's actually, they're seeing that they're creating these positions of like drone supervisors or drone, specialists in the warehouse, which is essentially your core inventory person. So now they're working with the drones, working on scheduling them, and then they're really the ones that are consuming all that data that the drones are capturing. So, like Jason said, we're creating so much data, and this drone is just capturing so much data as well. So it's not only capturing the counts that are out there, but it's capturing now physical images too of these different locations. So you're able to see different things through that. So I think that's really the automation that I've seen in terms of inventory control so far. And obviously, as well, there's RFID out there too, right? Which is making things a little easier because you're able to just capture the location of where products are. And, I've seen some products where, I haven't used them personally, but the claim is that you could essentially do a physical inventory of your warehouse sitting from your desk. But with RFID, obviously there's some limitations because the cost is still high. So if you're selling, small cost item, it's not really worth the investment to put the RFID on the product. But that's really the automation that I've seen, and the drones are pretty cool.
Yeah, is that would you say that's the most exciting thing you saw at Modex, or was there something way more impressive?
No, I mean, the most exciting thing I see, well, you probably think maybe it's kind of boring, but
let's hear it.
I got excited about it.
Let's bore this
actually,
group.
It kind of ties into the Internet of Things as well. There's this company called Pallet Alliance. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with them here, but they actually have something called the IntelliPallet, which is a smart pallet. So the pallet is actually...
Laura Hayes, are your ears perking up at this a little bit?
Yes, yeah. So it's a smart pallet. So Pallet Alliance, what they do actually is they handle all your pallets. So they'll come in, they'll actually do a full audit of your process. They'll look at your product, how you're shipping, all these different things, and they'll create a tailored pallet program for you. So, typically, what I've seen in my experience is that, there's a couple pallet vendors in the area, and we're going to get maybe one or two. One that's the cheapest is going to be the primary, and then we have a backup just in case. But what these guys are doing is they're going in, they're looking and analyzing everything that's going on with your product, and then they're creating custom pallets. And then they're sourcing them, and they have all these different vendors all over the country that they source from. So you're having more of a better pallet experience, if you want to call it that. That sounds very exciting, right? But so anyway, you're creating these custom pallets, or you're just sourcing better pallets and for better overall optimization. But what they're doing now is they're actually tagging these pallets so that they can be tracked. So not only is it giving you the ability to now know where those pallets are, which is especially important if you have custom pallets because they're going to cost you more and you want to retain those assets and try and get them back if you can. But it also gives you visibility into where these pallets are located within your facility or even on the road. So if something happens, they have the ability to kind of know where something might have happened. So if you lose freight, you have the ability to track these pallets and kind of figure out where they might have dropped off, like where you don't get a signal anymore. The other thing too is that we just talked about RFID for inventory control tracking, but if you're utilizing these pallets and you want to marry whatever product that you're putting on this pallet with the pallet itself and the pallet's tag, then you can actually utilize that for inventory control because you can see where the location of that is.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
This is what I think is really fun about all of this type of technology and conversation is we're in a spot right now where, especially with some of the younger generations who aren't aware of the industry,
right,
they kind of think of, if I go into the industry in the automation world, I'm looking at pick pack arms, or maybe I'm looking at, an automated guided vehicle or whatever it is. They don't always understand that really before any of that, you have to participate in this data collection piece. Jason Torino, I think is how you say his last name, with Bastion Solutions, presented yesterday evening at our final workshop and talked a lot about how all of this knowledge and all of these consultings and integration conversations, if they don't happen, no matter what you purchase, you're going to lose out on it because you don't understand the full applications.
Right.
So having things like this that you may think sound a little dull because custom palette doesn't really perk a lot of people's ears. It perks your ears up. And Laura Laura hayes his ears up, but the rest of us, we don't think about that. But when you start to talk about, again, the applications and what the end result is and why we're putting these things in place, it suddenly starts to click and it becomes a little sexier at that point then, because then you're like, oh, that's cool. I never knew I could track those kinds of things. And I've seen a lot of that, especially just like going through my LinkedIn feed. Having those data tracking tags is becoming incredibly more visible. And I think when you look at blockchain and supply chain and kind of what's going on, especially even right now, and how, economies are taking a really big hit because of not understanding the way things move from place to place, having those things in place means you can better understand that and avoid disrupting, the way the things go, if you can understand where it's been. So, okay. So my only other question for you is, I want to know what your all-time favorite or favorite this year, if it's too hard to go back since you just celebrated your birthday, podcast.
Sure. So I have a couple actually. I couldn't pick one when you asked me. So obviously, my favorite one was the one with Lora, right? So
I told him he wasn't allowed to say that, just for the record.
Yeah, so of course I said it definitely, but no, I mean it definitely was an interesting one because I was really interested, coming from a distribution background, seeing just the collaborative environment that's here in the Hendricks County area. Where I am, and I saw last night coming from the airport to here, it's just warehouse, which is very similar to the area which I work in New Jersey as well, in the Cranberry area, and many areas in New Jersey now. But I will say that we do not have like that kind of collaborative, collective or effort by any group really to bring those different types of industries together. So it's really admirable. And I think what you guys have here, you guys are incredibly lucky to have these kind of resources and all these different trainings and learning and development things. So it's really interesting to hear about how you guys have created that, and also, how it's been receptive and how it's kind of helped the economy here too, right? So that was definitely one of my favorites. Another one actually, which is, I just got to see a demo of the actual prototype yesterday. And so at ProMat last year, Hendricks, which is a battery company, they do batteries for tons and tons of things, but they do batteries for forklifts. They introduced the concept of wireless forklift charging. And wireless forklift charging is just like it sounds. It's basically, like your wireless phone charging pad. It's like a gigantic pad that you put a forklift on top of, and it charges the battery. So that was probably, when I was at ProMat last year, that was probably my number one favorite thing from there. And then at Modex this year, they actually had a full-on demo of it. So yesterday I got to see they rode a power rider over and just park it on top of this circular pad, and then it just starts charging.
I've seen the ones where the forklift knows it's dying and it goes and finds its home and plugs in and does it. So it's that, but wireless, more or less.
Yeah, so that's like an automated forklift, but this is for like all forklifts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like you have, one of the biggest things, I think, we can talk about forklift charging. I'm talking about really exciting things. Right?
Sexy stuff, people.
These are exciting for me. So, one of the things about forklift charging is that, there's always the need to remember that you have to charge, or to kind of time out your productivity around your charge times. And if you have an employee that, for whatever reason, they forget to plug in their machine at the end of their shift, or they forget to plug it in when they go on break to get like that opportunity charge, then you can run into an issue because you have you go dead, or you don't have enough power, then it's a hit on your productivity. So what this wireless charging does is it gives you the idea and the concept behind it. It's not a live thing yet, but it's closer and closer. So the idea is that in the area where your forklifts are parked, the whole floor will essentially be one of these wireless charging pads. So when all the employee has to do is park it in the area, and it will automatically register and know that the truck is there and start charging it. And now to take that a step further, they're looking at creating what they're going to call these hot lanes or hot aisles. So in your fastest moving, where your fastest moving product is, or your highest traveled aisles or locations within the warehouse, you'll actually be able to have these pads in the floor. And as they're driving and moving through the aisle, it's actually recognizing. So the battery is a smart battery, essentially, and the battery is communicating with the charging pad. And the battery is going to tell the charging pad, hey, I need to charge. So as you're going through this aisle, you don't even have to stop. It's going to send power to the battery and charge it. So
this sounds like something that can be adapted to an existing person-driven forklift. So companies are not having to purchase a whole new fleet. They can just add this as essentially an add-on for their existing.
Right. So it's through the battery itself.
Wow.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to do with the machine. The battery, it would have to be Hendricks brand battery. Right. But yeah, it's through the whole battery and the whole telemetry and everything that's going.
That's really cool. I like that they don't have to invest in major new fleet equipment or go straight to automated. They can still have the human piece of it, but have an added piece of technology that makes it more efficient. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, those were my 2 questions.
Okay.
But what do you got?
Sure. Yeah. So no, I just wanted to ask you, about, one of the big things about Modex and just as, being here and seeing some of the topics that are discussed is, collaboration and flexibility is such a big thing in our industry now. And I think as, more technology comes into play and, collaboration and flexibility is even more important to now take that technology and, maybe it's cool at one point, but how do we get it and make it into usable format? So, how do you continue from an economic development standpoint to continue to support like a group like this and a county like this with that kind of collaboration and flexibility?
I think having an event like this was kind of our first go-to. We wanted to make sure that we created a space where people could come in and learn what our process looked like. Yesterday, we talked briefly about maybe filling some space talking to the group about where HLSP came from and why we are who we are and why we do what we do. And it really first of all, it came from having a group of people who were individually connected with each other on a friendly level and a professional level anyway. We wanted to work together. We wanted to find ways to collaborate. We wanted to build up that partnership. So that's not always an ingredient for a lot of people. We get that. However, I think when you start to do that with your team and you start to have that professional impact and other people seeing what is coming out of it on a much broader scale, it becomes more realistic for other groups to imitate that to some extent. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's really about making sure that we find platforms to tell our story, find ways to spread the word about what we're doing, find cheerleaders and advocates throughout the community who will take that and share it with others as well. And it's sustained by that, and it's sustained by finding people that are in positions throughout the community to make a difference, to know your story, and then support those efforts. So we have about 2 months left on this grant. We will not stop doing what we're doing. It will just change the way we're funded. So when people like Laura Hayes are working with companies to take part in leadership training or working with other individuals to even just understand some of these technologies, instead of the funding coming from us, we now have a really great script where we can talk about the results from the companies that took advantage of the funding we already have, and hopefully encourage those people then to find the funding either in other grant programs that we still have throughout the state or within their own budgets because they can see the impact that it has. So through what we've done over these 2 years, it's going to continue based on the people who have supported us through the grant process, being those advocates and continuing to find community members that are advocates as well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think like you said, you've had some success stories. So why don't you tell us a little bit about maybe some success stories from a company perspective, and then also on an individual level too, because you guys do help facilitate individual trainings as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a group success. It's no surprise, everyone kind of comes up against this right now, but our unemployment rate in Hendricks County, Jeff, I think is at 2.8%. 28-ish right now. So it's really low, obviously. And about 20% of our private industry is logistics, distribution, warehousing. And a lot of those open positions that they have are some of those lower level, entry level, unskilled positions that they have a lot of trouble filling. So most of our companies were experiencing about 100%, sometimes over 100% turnover. Wow. But of the 4 or 5 companies that have used the most grant funds from our program, all of those companies, and one of them has 11 buildings in our county, have under 50% turnover. Wow. So if we're talking from like a literal budgetary, like very real numbers standpoint, the businesses are obviously learning things and taking advantage of the skills that they're learning and making a huge difference on the way that they can hire and retain those entry-level employees. Because a lot of that training is not going towards skilled forklift driving or understanding pick packing or whatever it might be. Those skills are going towards mid and upper level management to understand, how do I build a better team? How do I create a better culture? What are the things that I can do within my 4 walls that make a difference for all of the people that are part of this organization with me? So that's one of my favorite things to tell, because I think it's a very tangible result from a very intangible place. And I think connecting those two is super important. Personally, I think it's really cool to be able to look at the program as a whole and see what we've accomplished as a team. We went into it with the expectation of taking the money that we had for training and impacting about 75 people. But now we have about $75,000 left in that fund, and we've impacted over 300 people. Wow. So it's opened our eyes as an organization and as an individual, again, to what you can accomplish when you get out of your own way. Right. Because I think we kind of went into it with some expectations of, we're going to get everybody 4-year degrees in supply chain management, or we're going to turn everybody into robotics engineers or whatever. Right. And what really happened was people said, we don't need that. We need a much more fundamental baseline of awareness. We need our managers to be better managers. We need our leaders to be better leaders, and we need our people to feel valued. And we were like, wow, that has a bigger impact to them, and it costs less for us. And we have that reach then extended, hundreds of times more than what we anticipated. So I think being able to, as a team, walk out into the community and say, we very pridefully wear that badge of making that impact, and it makes us feel really great that we were able to do that. We didn't do anything to do it. We did what people told us, and that's the result. So we like to tell that story a lot too.
All right, yeah, it's really good stuff. I mean, I think it's actually kind of a point, that we should listen to as just business as a whole, is listening to the voice of the customer, right? And that's what you guys did. You listened, right? And I think that, it's interesting that you said that, at first you're like, we're going to get a whole bunch of people robotics degrees or something like that. And, it kind of reminds me of a discussion I had before with somebody named David Clear, who's of Vecna Robotics. And so he actually, we were discussing the idea of, whether are we going towards the dark warehouse, or are we going towards collaborative robots, and what's going to happen to people's jobs, right? Because that's one of the big things about robots is it's going to take away jobs. But he had an interesting perspective, because one of the schools of thought out there is that it's going to actually end up elevating people's jobs instead. And he had a pretty good point that, you need to kind of create awareness in your employees of what's coming and get them exposed to this a little bit, because he said at the end of the day, companies are not going to go out and hire all these robotics PhDs, right? And there probably won't be enough robotics PhDs to do all these things. So how do you guys ensure that, within the Hendricks County area, that the training and education that's available is kind of also including that technological shift a little bit and kind of creating awareness? Obviously, you guys are creating awareness with Robotics Playground here, things of that nature. But for like the regular warehouse workers and things of that nature, how do you kind of create that awareness for them?
So Vincennes University's Logistics Training and Education Center is the perfect example of that collaborative spirit and that partnership ability meeting that very specific need.
Okay.
So we had, in the very beginning, actually even before we got the grant, we had hosted events called deep dives. And those were meetings where we had between 20 and 40 people in the room from education, from industry, and from the community to all sit down and talk about where those holes existed. And what came out of that, it was probably the second or third one that we hosted. Vincennes kind of sat down and said, what I'm hearing from you is as you adopt technology, you're going to have people who understand 3 and 4 different varieties of what that technology needs to operate and be useful.
Right.
So they had an industrial maintenance degree out of their Lebanon facility, which is north of where we are, that was really more applicable to manufacturing and those processes, which we know are very similar to what we've got going on. But because of what they heard from the employers, they were able to tweak that program and move it into their Plainfield facility. So now they're teaching industrial maintenance, but with a supply chain focus. And we're putting people through that program right now, even with our grant dollars. So it was a way for the employers to be heard again, to be talking a little bit more about the skill sets that they're seeing it now, but they anticipate it increasing. And the 16-week program gives them a lot of variety and understanding all of these different pieces of what can go into an industrial maintenance technician position. So I think as we see that change and as we continue to be that conduit between industry and education, we'll be able to relay that information back and forth so that both are able to do what they can to adjust and make sure all of those training needs are met, as those technologies become more and more popular.
Okay, really interesting stuff. Yeah, and I like that. So I want to ask too, my last question, I guess. So, from a training perspective, right? So one of the things that I just actually saw at Modex was they're utilizing training in terms of they're using augmented reality or virtual reality for training. So have you seen that kind of training start to take place in this area? If so, how? If not yet, how do you think companies or training facilitators are starting to ramp up to utilize those technologies?
So the one that we have seen is a partnership between Ivy Tech, which is our local community college, and Pro Logistics, which is a hiring staffing agency. Right. They have taken an idea of training in a different way and doing some of these collaborative pieces as well, and they've used it with forklift drivers. So right. They have a partnership with Ivy Tech where they bring on their augmented reality forklift training simulators and do training in the staffing agency so that they are creating a pool of individuals that our local employers can pull from. And myself and one of our partners, Krista Kramer, we got to try it out. And we did a lot of damage in a little bit of time. So I have so much respect for anyone that can operate in an augmented reality situation, right, because it threw me for a loop. But I think it's really cool that they're doing that. I think it gives the individuals the opportunity to really see and feel that space and understand if that's something they want to be a part of, without necessarily having to take the job and then pay for training and do all of these other things. They're being right. skilled while they're being in the process of being given a job opportunity. So that's where we're seeing it now, but I have a pretty good feeling there will be a lot more to come.
Definitely, yeah. And I think I actually did the virtual reality with Raymond forklifts yesterday.
Did you do well?
I hit a couple cones, but
cones are okay because they're not quite as expensive as racking.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get to that lesson yet in the training, but it's really interesting, and I think it's super realistic. And like you said, I think it saves a lot of time on training. So I guess, one more question.
Oh, you have a follow-up now. I see how it is. Okay.
We talk and things come up. So, from a training perspective, you guys have obviously implemented a lot of new training initiatives and helped to kind of facilitate those and help companies get better training. So how are you seeing companies benefit from a better training program and kind of a more structured training program, and to develop those candidates a little more? Like what kind of time savings are you seeing for those companies?
I think there's probably a little bit of it that's a time savings, and it's maybe going to be more realized as that training becomes more popular.
Right.
But I think really the biggest impact we've seen from it as of now is more that individual is feeling like they're valued by that employer because they know that employer is taking the time to put skills in their hands and to make sure that they feel like they're comfortable going into a position that they're in. And going back to some of the major partners that we're working with, I really think that those employers know that those individuals are going out and telling that story, which just makes it easier for the employers in the end. They're becoming very well known for being great places to work.
Right.
And that's outside of paychecks and benefits. That's just really feeling like I know that my HR manager cares about me and wants me to do better and will give me opportunities to grow because that's the first thing they did when I got here. They wanted me to be trained in X, Y, or Z. So if that's the first thing that's happening when I start working here, I have no reason to think that that's not going to be what continues to happen as I continue my career here. And we have some employers who will sit down with new hires, and we've developed a career pathway document that we shared with our employers. And they'll sit down with new hires and they'll put that pathway or their version of it out with the new hire, and they'll say, what do you think of this? Is anything on here interesting to you? Do you feel like this is something that you might want to pursue? Are you interested in gaining more education and experience? So I think it's pretty much expected that most people are going to feel good when that's the conversation they're having. So I think that that's probably the biggest impact that we're seeing right now when it comes to training being related to the individual and how they connect with employers.
Okay, great stuff. Yeah, I think that's huge to kind of develop that culture, and it helps obviously with retention as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So we are out of time, and I really appreciate you driving to Atlanta, flying to Indy, flying back to Atlanta, and then driving back to New Jersey.
Yeah. It makes it a little crazy, I guess, with this whole other thing going on, too.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Probably Google that later.
What is that? Yeah, what is that?
All right, well, if you guys don't mind, let's give a round of applause for Kevin. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Give a round of applause for Lora, too, I would say.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.